welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Laura.
Somewhere in Arlington, Texas, there's a name nobody has ever said out loud on the record. Not to police, not to a reporter, not to unsolved mysteries, not to a jury, because there was never a trial to say it in. 39 years ago, a woman sat down for dinner in her own bedroom, not at her kitchen table or her dining table, in her bedroom with a tray set with 2 plates. We don't know what was on them. We don't know if there were 2 forks or glasses. Nobody wrote that down, or if they did, it's never been shared publicly. Here's what we do know. We know Patsy Wright was found dead in that same bedroom hours later. We know the official story, the one her brother-in-law told police that night. That's the only account of those plates that exists anywhere. It's never been independently confirmed, never challenged, repeated in every article about this case for 4 decades, as if it were simply a fact. Maybe it is. Or maybe somewhere between that dinner and the phone call to her sister, something happened that only one person walked away knowing the truth about. Last episode, we told you who Patsy Wright was, a woman who built something out of nothing. She was about to buy a new property. She had her wax museum business, a whole future ahead of her, and apparently a target on her back that not one, but several people in her life had reason to put there. Today, we go looking for the person who is responsible. Because in this case, it seems like everyone had a motive. And everyone, I guess, had an alibi. But like we talked about last time, what does that alibi even mean? Someone has never had to answer for it. They got away with murder using a bottle of NyQuil in a house with the alarm system off. Now, this is part 2 of Patsy Wright's story. Let's meet the suspects. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, these are the people in Patsy's life who Sergeant Gustafson looked at, really looked at, and had to ask the hardest questions you can ask about another human being.
Right. Like, did you do this?
Mm-hmm. And to be very clear, this is just who our sergeant looked at because none of these people were ever charged. None of them were obviously ever convicted. Some cooperated fully with police and some didn't. And the truth is, we don't know. We genuinely, nearly 40 years later, do not know who killed Patsy Wright.
Just so crazy to me. But I guess we have some evidence that we can look at, but there's so many variables like we talked about in part 1. So hard to even narrow it down.
Agreed.
I'm interested to see who he looked at.
There's some really interesting stuff in here. I'm going to present each person as fairly as I can. The motive, the access, the behavior, and also the holes in each theory. Because the maddening thing about this case is that every suspect had something compelling pointing towards them and something that gives you pause.
It's like an Agatha Christie novel where all the suspects did it.
Absolutely. That's the most accurate description of this case I've ever heard. Okay, let's go. Suspect number 1, Steve Horning.
Who was Steve to Patsy?
He was her sister's husband. So her sister Sally's husband.
Okay. Oh, and he's suspect number 1. That's really interesting.
Well, okay, let me rephrase that. The first one we're going to talk about.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that he's their number 1 suspect, but he's just the first one we'll dive into.
All right. Sounds good.
Let me tell you a little bit about Steve because he's a very specific type of person that I think a lot of us have encountered at some point in our lives.
All right. Let's get to know Steve.
Like we mentioned, Steve's the guy who married into something, into Patsy's family, but also, he married into something good. And then over time, he revealed himself to be not quite what was advertised.
So he's like the guy who showed up super charming and then becomes some kind of problem?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Steve was running a small construction company at the time of Patsy's death. This company was failing. His household income came almost entirely from Sally's share of the wax museum business, which importantly was a business he had no ownership stake in.
So, really, something he was financially dependent on, but he had no control over.
Right. And no right to, like we mentioned. Sally and Patsy's dad is the one who started it. It's a family business. But this meant he was entirely at the mercy of two women, his wife and her sister. And it seems like one of those women had figured him out completely.
And that was Patsy?
Yes, Patsy. She seemed to know what Steve was. Her friends reported that she didn't just dislike him, she was infuriated by him. Specifically infuriated because he had spent Sally's personal inheritance, not the museum money, Sally's own inheritance from her father, which was the money that Sally and Patsy had had to fight for in court. Steve had worked his way through it and then gone into debt on top of it.
Oh, geez. Not good at money then.
When Patsy and Sally had set up their business arrangement, they had each taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on the other. The idea was simple. If one of them died, the survivor would use the payout to buy the other share of the museum stock and keep the business intact. Now, in June 1985, that seemed reasonable. By 1987, it was a problem because two things had changed. The first was that the museum stock had appreciated significantly. The buy-sell price was now far below what the shares were actually worth. The second, and this is the detail that accelerated everything, in fall of 1985, Sally had been diagnosed with cancer. Her prognosis initially was not good. If Sally died with the arrangement in place, Steve, under Texas community property law, would have claim to a controlling share of everything. $500,000 in insurance money, plus museum stock worth considerably more than the buy-sell agreement reflected. Patsy had been working really hard to change this arrangement, specifically in case anything happened to Sally. She had scheduled a board meeting for early November 1987 to put a new agreement in place.
Is that the meeting that we talked about at the end of last episode?
Yes. This meeting was scheduled 2 weeks after she died. A formal sit-down with Sally to finalize everything. They would sign the paperwork, which would essentially put the walls in place, make it official and irrevocable.
But she never made it to that meeting.
Right. Unfortunately, no. When Patsy died, Steve and Sally inherited a significant stake in the museum and its assets. So the paperwork that would have cut Steve out completely still hadn't been signed. It never got signed. The legal protection, 2 weeks away, simply ceased to exist.
I find that interesting that that would pass to Sally and not any part to her children. Like that she would have it set up that if something happened to her, stake would go to her kids.
That's what she was working to do. She didn't want it to be a court battle. She wanted it to go to her kids, like her part of it, and not have it go to where Steve could now have this controlling stake in it.
It's interesting that she wouldn't have had that set up before because her kids are in their 20s at this point. I know I have all of my stuff set up to benefit my husband or kids already. It seems like if she was so good with her money, she would have had some protection set up before she found out he was terrible with money and was so in debt and spent everything.
Yeah, right. And she could have found that out more recently because they had done that whole court thing. So her father had died 11 years before she did. And it took time for them to find out that their inheritance would go to the stepmom because he didn't have it set up. And then she's dealing with that court battle, working through the legal system. I don't know if she just hadn't had time or assumed that it would go to her kids. I mean, I do believe that she had a will that said her assets went to her kids, but I think the business part of it required some specific legal interventions.
Oh, okay. I see. That makes sense.
This is one of two of the most specifically timed motives in this case, and Sergeant Gustafson sees it immediately. Steve and Sally are brought in for questioning, and they figure out quickly that they're being looked at as suspects. Sally later said the interviews were deeply uncomfortable. They both took polygraphs. Steve took two. The first came back inconclusive, the second one he passed. He cooperated overall and even suggested that police hire a private investigator.
Which is either genuine helpfulness or a pretty committed performance to prove he's innocent, I guess.
Exactly. That is the impossible position this detail puts you in. And then remember, there's the CPR when they got to Patsy's house.
Right. And if I don't know, if he knew what it was and knew CPR wasn't going to help, that makes him look better to sit and perform CPR on her. If he's like, well, it doesn't matter. She's like, this is going to kill her anyway.
Right. And, there's this comment about the CPR where he is getting that NyQuil in his mouth. I would be willing to bet that a lot of people don't know that can happen when you're doing CPR.
That they can throw up. Yeah.
Exactly. So he is spitting it out in front of witnesses, and there's like this back and forth. People are saying, oh, he's spitting it out because he knew it was poison. Well, to me, it's like, of course. Why would you want something that someone else respirated in your mouth? Like, obviously.
Obviously, if you get throw up in your mouth, you're going to spit it out. Even if you know what it is. I'm not even going to eat, like someone backwashes in a cup, I'm not going to drink it. Gross. If people are saying that means he knew what was in there, I think that's quite a stretch because you're not going to swallow someone else's barf.
Yeah. Even if you know what it was.
Like, of course you're going to spit it out.
Exactly. Of course. And you don't want to take NyQuil if you're at someone else's house, you're driving, like all of it, the throw up especially, but also.
I do see that point though. If you are getting it in your mouth and you know it's poison, I think you're going to freak out a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Because it could be like, what if I accidentally did swallow it? What if I did get some of the poison in my mouth?
I'm seeing what it's doing to her. I don't want that.
I would think you would freak out a little bit more and maybe seek some medical attention. If you thought it was a possibility, what you gave her could have gotten into your system too.
For sure. So that can go both ways. And I do think him doing CPR, people say both things where he's trying to save her, but maybe he already knew, like you said, she wasn't coming back. This makes him look like a hero as opposed to someone who might be responsible. And I still think it's very possible that he didn't know he would get any of that in his mouth by doing CPR.
Yeah, for sure. But I would be willing to bet that if it had been him, he probably would have panicked having gotten it in his mouth.
Yeah, for sure. Over the top panicking where he's going to the hospital.
Because I've seen people give mouth to mouth and then they're like, okay, can you check for any of these things that can be passed through saliva? And they're not even poisoned people who were throwing up in their mouths.
Whatever she got, I got. Maybe check for strychnine. I don't know. Can you prevent that?
It's like you worry about that when you get someone else's bodily fluids in your mouth. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I see that being not as possible in my mind. It's interesting, right? Because you can look at it both ways, which honestly, we're going to say a lot. It keeps coming up. Now, the day before Patsy died, she told a friend directly, I don't want Steve Horning near me. And I really would love some context around that quote. Was there a specific reason? Clearly, there was something going on there, but that is something that was reported to detectives after she died.
Yeah, that is an interesting quote, too. She could just be very mad at him for the money situation.
Yeah. Adding stress to Sally, putting her in debt. That's her only sister. They're very close. They work together.
If they're working together, they're talking, likely Sally is telling more to Patsy than she would tell somebody else because it's her sister.
You're going to feel some kind of way if she's feeling that way about their money situation, for sure.
And, maybe there's other things going on between Sally and Steve that weren't known at this point.
Right. That maybe aren't part of this case at all. So maybe it doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Now, they talk about the fact that Steve went with Sally that night. And to me, that seems totally normal. Like if I were having to run somewhere, I would make my husband come with me, especially in the middle of the night to a situation where I don't know what is going on. I'd want his help, right?
Yes.
People do bring up, was he going to check the scene? Was he going to see if he could get rid of the NyQuil? Was he going for some sinister reason instead of trying to help his wife? Like that, again, can be taken both ways.
Right. I agree. I think to be fair too, if one of my sisters called me and said, I had this, I think something's happening, I need help, I would probably bring my husband too.
Yeah.
I think that's a normal thing.
But also, because it's a normal thing, it doesn't look weird that he's there. If he volunteered to go with her and she wasn't asking, that's just a nice, helpful thing.
Exactly.
All of those things. I can see how they're looking at it critically because they're trying to nail down a suspect. But all of those things can be explained away pretty easy, I think.
I think so too. And I bet Sally's scared if she doesn't know what's going on. She hears her sister say she can't breathe and then she collapses. She might be freaking out. She needs that support.
Right. And I want you to be here with me depending on what I'm walking into.
You didn't start a business just to keep the lights on. You're here to sell more today than yesterday. You're here to win. Lucky for you, Shopify built the best converting checkout on the planet. Like the just one tapping, ridiculously fast acting, sky-high sales stacking, champion of checkouts. That's the good stuff right there. So if your business is in it to win it, win with Shopify. Start your free trial today at shopify.com/win.
Now, Sally was also questioned. She was in the orbit of suspicion by proximity to Steve, but the consensus among investigators and the people who knew them was that Sally really, genuinely, devastatingly loved her sister. They all agreed that her grief appeared real and deep, and really, there's no concrete evidence pointing at Sally independently of Steve.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's one more detail about Steve that Gustafson had in his file. In 1970, Steve had been arrested and charged with assaulting a woman. The charges were eventually dropped, and Patsy, being the kind of woman who protected herself and the people she loved with information, had run a background check on him. She told a friend afterward that the report, quote, wasn't good, and then she destroyed it. So she knew who he was. She had documentation. She said she destroyed it, maybe to protect Sally from knowing, or possibly because she had already decided the legal walls she was building were protection enough. All right, suspect number 2 is Bob Cox, who was Patsy's second ex-husband. And honestly, the Bob Cox thread is more complicated than it first appears. Now, thanks to primary source newspaper reporting, we have a pretty clear picture of just how complicated it all is.
Interesting. I don't feel like we talked a lot about Bob before, so I'm interested to hear this thread too.
Okay, so he was a businessman. In the early 1970s, he sold a fabric chain to Pier 1 for more than $1 million. He became an investor, and at some point, he opened a competing wax museum. which honestly, I feel like could be a TV series, just that sentence, right?
Yeah.
His wax museum featured all of the American presidents. It was set up in the same Dallas State Fairground building that Patsy's father had vacated when he moved their Southwestern Historical Wax Museum to Grand Prairie.
So he literally moved into the space that her family left behind. That's so interesting.
Yeah, moved right into it. And this was all before he married Patsy.
Oh,
It wasn't after the divorce and now he's upset. This was before. When they were married, the marriage was not good. Cox was reportedly verbally abusive. He had what friends described also as a serious gambling problem. He essentially lived on Patsy's money. And after the divorce, rather than moving on, he began surveilling her.
like he was stalking her?
Yeah, watching her home, watching her movements, showing up in ways that seemed to frighten her. And here's the detail from original reporting that I think changes how you understand Bob Cox entirely. Patsy told friends, and this is a reported quote from people who knew her, that during their marriage, Cox had told her he knew people who could, quote, get anything done, including having someone snuffed out.
He actually said that to her?
Yeah, he actually said that to her. At the time, she took it as bravado, probably because what else are you going to do aside from run? She thought of it as like the kind of thing a certain type of man says, maybe to sound tough or dangerous. But after the surveillance started, after he started showing up outside her house, she wasn't so sure anymore.
Is he the one who broke some of her windows that caused her to install the alarm system?
I wonder that too. I wasn't able to find exactly who broke the windows. I don't know if they know, but right around that same time, she got the alarm installed. They were happening concurrently. Her aunt and her sister urged her to just do it, get it in, you'll feel safer, you'll feel better. And she did go further than that. She got the alarm system. She also got a restraining order against Cox, which prohibited him from coming within 100 feet of her.
Yeah, that's not just being cautious. That's really being afraid that he will harm you. Do you have to have some kind of, what do you need to have to get a restraining order against somebody? Because you can't just be like, I don't like them. I don't want them coming near me. Like, don't you have some kind of proof of them doing something or being a threat to you?
Right, because we have covered cases where people have tried to get restraining orders with reason and they're denied. The minimum requirement, at least now, is filing a completed court petition, and you need a sworn statement that details some kind of specific ground for why you're trying to get the restraining order, like credible threats, physical abuse, sexual abuse, stalking, severe harassment, and you have to have some kind of evidence or show that you have a reason to fear for your safety. So there had to be something that she could point to in court to even obtain that order.
Yeah, to actually get it put in place.
Yeah, which is a really good point and a really good question. By the end of 1986, the surveillance had apparently stopped. It seemed like the restraining order got Cox to back off, but the reason that he may have backed off is where this gets really dark.
Like, what do you mean? What happened next?
By late 1986, Cox had a much bigger problem than Patsy's restraining order. His wax museum, the one in the State Fairground building, had been connected to a fire, specifically a fire at a warehouse facility in Galveston in September 1983. It destroyed a lot of his wax collection. Cox filed an insurance claim for substantial damages with Hartford Lloyd's Insurance Company.
Did he get a payout from them for this?
He did not. Hartford said no. More specifically, they countered that Cox, who was in serious financial difficulty at the time, possibly because of that gambling side, had arranged the arson himself to collect the insurance payout. So they went one step further and they sued him. And that civil trial, which was Cox versus Hartford, was scheduled to begin early November 1987.
That's right. So, like right after Patsy was murdered.
Right, 2 weeks. 2 weeks after Patsy died. Now, this is the part that the earlier versions of this case summary, when people are writing articles, get slightly wrong. So we'll try to correct the record. Patsy wasn't just vaguely connected to the trial. She wasn't just a background figure in Cox's business world. She had been specifically identified by Harper's attorney as a witness who could provide testimony that was damaging to the claims that Cox was making.
So she knew something about this fire.
Something specific, something very specific. The Hartford attorney had met with her 8 to 10 times in 1986 and 1987 to discuss the value of the property involved and various other things. It had become clear that what Patsy knew, what she could testify to in this trial, would help Hartford's case considerably against her ex-husband.
Wow. So he's looking at a trial also in the next couple weeks. Sounds like she had a lot going on the beginning of November 1987.
She really did. All very important to the people that were involved in each of those.
Right. Damaging to these people too.
Mm-hmm. And before she can testify against them, she dies from a poisoning that for the first 8 days didn't look like that at all.
Yeah. And if strychnine doesn't show up on standard screens.
Yeah. This person, very easily could have gotten away with it. They did get away with it because no one's ever been charged. But what I mean by that is there might not have been any murder investigation at all.
Right.
So that is either an extraordinary coincidence that this happened right before the trial or some kind of plan. And Cox, when the police came to talk to him about the murder of his ex-wife, did the one thing that almost nobody else in Patsy's entire world did. He refused to cooperate at all. Wouldn't return calls, wouldn't answer questions. Virtually everyone else who knew Patsy really was falling all over themselves to help, to share information, to do anything that could help investigators find her killer. But Bob Cox closed the door and kept it closed.
It's really interesting because everything that's going on and your whole history, I feel like if it wasn't you, you would be trying to clear your name instead of hiding, not cooperating. Seems suspicious right there.
Yeah, agreed. Now, there's one more detail that makes him even more suspicious.
What's that? Because he's already seems very suspicious.
Very, very much so. Bob Cox owned a chemical company.
So he had a way to access strychnine as well.
Yes, he did, which investigators specifically noted as a potential source of access to this pure powder strychnine found in Patsy's NyQuil. Someone who owned a chemical company would know where to source it, they would know how to handle it, and they would know how to use it. Where to put it, how stable it was, all of those things.
So he had a motive, he had the knowledge, he had the access, he had a deadline, and he won't talk to police.
Yep, not one word.
Of all the suspects we've talked about so far, of the 3 really, if you count Sally, but I'm guessing there are more too. He seems very plausible.
Yes, he does. And it's a lot of things pointing in one direction. And yet, somehow, without his cooperation, without physical evidence, a witness, anything like that, it's all just coincidences. There's nothing to get a warrant to make him come and talk. There's nothing that they can do. Knowing that all of those things line up, but somehow being able to prove it turned out to be two completely different things. And it seems like Cox understood that better than anyone. After the Unsolved Mysteries segment aired, Cox became the subject of renewed scrutiny at the Dallas Country Club. Friends noted he was rarely seen there anymore. But one detail from this period is after Patsy's death, Bob Cox hosted a murder mystery party. At that party, Cox was the only guest who correctly guessed that the murderer had hired a hitman.
Wow. It's very, very interesting that he decided not to cooperate at all.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, suspect number 3 was Leo Fikes. Now, he has sometimes been described as Patsy's boyfriend at the time of her death. He was not. Her boyfriend at the time of her death was Larry Todd, who was in Austin the night she died, and whose alibi was established by his own phone call to Patsy that evening. Leo was a previous boyfriend. He and Patsy had dated on and off for several years, and it was actually Leo who introduced her to cutting horses, which became one of the great loves of her life. Their relationship ended because Leo wanted to marry her, and Patsy, after everything that had happened with Bob Cox, had decided she was done with marriage. By all accounts, they remained on reasonable terms. Leo came onto the detectives' radar for several reasons. He had known Patsy well enough and long enough to know about the NyQuil habit, one of very few people who did. He ran a company called Fikes Chemical. It was a restroom sanitizing service, so that gave him professional knowledge and familiarity with chemical products. And an anonymous tip connected him to a woman named Linda Donahue, who had been found murdered in her bedroom, stabbed through the neck. They found Leo's business card in her possessions. And then there was this. Investigators discovered that Leo had made a purchase in the summer of 1987 at the only outlet in Dallas that sold strychnine. Strychnine was not on the receipt, though. Detectives said that Leo cooperated fully. He did take a polygraph and pass. He even participated in the Unsolved Mysteries reenactment. He was not under investigation for the Donahue murder. Gustafson cleared him as a primary suspect, but he also said publicly that he had not ruled out anybody, including Leo Fikes.
Right. So they're saying the unrequited love is his motive. Seems a little overkill.
Yeah, that's what they say. But you come back to the fact that someone had to be able to get into her house. Someone had to know about the NyQuil. I don't know that Sally's husband would necessarily know about that unless Sally had somehow mentioned it. And also, if Sally had somehow mentioned Patsy's house code to get in, they come back to those two plates. But again, that could have just been like a distraction. Could have just been her. Or not even at all, since really we're only relying on Steve's knowledge. And he's one of their people of interest, right?
I feel like if he was very much in love with her and she didn't want to get remarried, it doesn't seem like something you would kill somebody over.
Yeah.
Because it kind of feels like she named her horse after him too, right?
Dry Leo? Yeah, good catch. Leo at least cooperated fully with investigators. He did take a polygraph and passed. He was cleared as a primary suspect.
To me, I don't know, unless there was something else going on between them, he doesn't feel as much of a suspect to me, but...
Yeah, and there is always that possibility. There's that possibility that something else was going on that she kept private that you would never know about. But it is interesting that someone had to be able to get into her house and had to know about the NyQuil.
Yeah. I feel like Bob would know about the NyQuil.
I do too. I doubt that's like a brand new thing for her.
And if he was surveilling her, maybe they could have figured out her password to her alarm system.
Yeah, true. And, you would hope you use something completely unrelated to any specific things in your life especially if you're getting it to prevent an ex-husband from having access. Because he would know your birthday, he would know your kids' birthdays, he would know maybe the things to try as a code.
Yeah. And maybe if they were, depending on what kind of surveillance they were doing, I don't know. Maybe she didn't set her alarm all the time, maybe only at night. Maybe they went in during the day.
Oh, for sure.
What about her like horse trainers? Because she was with them quite a lot too, right?
Yeah. So Bill and Bonnie Alexander, they were Patsy's trainers out of Hico. She had given them a check the day before she died, and she just gave them a check, and they filled it out themselves and cashed it. Her horses were registered in their names. When investigators looked at all of that, it raised flags.
Yeah, I could see that with her. What, that horse was $26,000 horse. It's registered to them and not her.
Yep,
That does
exactly.
look suspicious on paper.
They thought so too. But both of them had a straightforward explanation.
You didn't start a business just to keep the lights on. You're here to sell more today than yesterday. You're here to win. Lucky for you, Shopify built the best converting checkout on the planet. Like the just one tapping, ridiculously fast acting, sky-high sales stacking, champion of checkouts. That's the good stuff right there. So if your business is in it to win it, win with Shopify. Start your free trial today at shopify.com/win.
Patsy had specifically asked them to hold the horses in their names to keep Steve Horning from getting them if anything happened to her. And it is interesting to me how many things she was putting in place in case anything happened to her.
Yeah, especially related to Steve.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if that's just because he was so embedded in their business, married to her sister, or something else. But I do find that interesting that it keeps coming up. Please do this in case anything happens to me, or I'm setting this legal stuff up in case anything happens to me.
Right.
Now, both of them were brought in, interviewed. They both agreed to take polygraph tests. They both passed, and both were cleared. All right, suspect number 5. This one is different from all the others because there's no name, no face, no verified identity.
This is the person suspected to have been eating off that second plate. Is that right?
Yes, the second plate. The ghost behind it, the person, if there was a person who was in Patsy's room that night, had a private dinner with her, and who has never come forward and never been publicly identified. This person exists in this case only as an absence, trying to find out if that plate on a tray belonged to someone else, if they had a reason to be there, if they're connected to the alarm system not being turned on. There have been tips submitted to Unsolved Mysteries over the years from people who knew Patsy in the horse world, suggesting she may have been seeing somebody, a different horse trainer, someone connected to her horse purchases and the training that she was doing. And the someone she'd asked multiple acquaintances to stay quiet about.
Well, that's interesting. So someone who moved in the private part of her life, like the early part, the Hico part.
Right. And that part of her life was very separate from the wax museum world or the Dallas charity circuit she was a part of. That part really was just hers. And that person, if they exist, knew her in the way that gives you access to her habits, her house, maybe her bathroom cabinet at midnight.
And really, if this person is out there, hasn't said anything all this time.
Has never come forward. And I think we mentioned this in the first part. They don't know if the person exists. And we mentioned in the first part that it seems like one reason to not come forward because you don't want to implicate yourself. Whether that means that they're guilty of anything or not is a different question. But
right. Yeah. I think it's hard to know there if that is just some random tip or something that does have merit, but I don't know. And I think earlier you mentioned there was someone else before all of this at the museum.
Yes. This is where I want to introduce you to two threads that are separate from all the other named suspects that we've talked about in this investigation, but is still part of Patsy's investigation. The first, her name is Lori Ann Williams. In September 1984, 3 years before Patsy died, Lori was 23 years old. She had worked her way up from a souvenir saleswoman at the museum, where she had worked since she was in high school. And she proved really valuable to Patsy and Sally, and they promoted her to be office manager, and also she was an assistant to Patsy. Lori's mother described her as a lieutenant on her high school drill team, an honor student, and a girl who loved her job so much that the entire Wright family attended her wedding.
So she was close to them.
Really close, really part of their whole world there. 1 month before she died, she developed severe abdominal pain. She missed 3 days of work. Her family thought it was the flu, but the pain kept coming and getting worse. She went to the hospital. Doctors removed her appendix. After they did that and tested it, they found that it was completely healthy. 11 days after that surgery, she died. The cause of death officially was listed as viral pneumonia, and they said it was a complication from the surgery.
Wow. So a 23-year-old who went in for an appendix that turned out to be fine, then died from pneumonia?
Right.
It's not very common for a health. Was she pretty healthy otherwise?
They said she was.
Hmm.
Now, here's the detail that Lori's family held on to. Before she died, she called a family member to say she had taken some cold medicine and something was really wrong.
Oh, so like pretty much the same thing that happened with Patsy.
Right, almost word for word. She took cold medicine, something's really wrong. And, the exact same thing that Patsy said when she talked to Sally.
Oh, that's very interesting.
When Patsy died of strychnine poisoning in 1987, Lori's family immediately thought of the sequence of events leading up to what happened to Lori. A forensic pathologist named Dr. H. Reg McDaniel, who had been the chief pathologist at Dallas-Fort Worth Medical Center in Grand Prairie, remembered Lori. He had treated her. He began researching the symptoms that she had displayed directly before her death, and his research pointed to one possible culprit.
Did he think it was the same thing that happened to Patsy?
Almost. He thought it might have been arsenic. So he believed that Lori may have ingested arsenic, which does cause nausea, vomiting, severe abdominal pain, and in small doses actually looks exactly like the flu before it becomes fatal. At the time, he had tried to convince investigators that there were links between the two cases. Like at the time when Patsy died, he pushed for Lori's body to be exhumed and tested.
Did they do that?
They did. It wasn't until September of 1989, 5 years after Lori died, they did exhume her body from Southland Memorial Park in Grand Prairie. A private investigator named Bill Deere, who had been hired by Patsy's family to work the case, organized all of it. They ran toxicology tests on about a dozen different tissue samples.
And did they find anything? Would they still find anything after all this time?
Good question. The first answer is that the results came back showing no arsenic, no strychnine, no poisons that we know of. And this was said by the forensic pathologist who performed a second, basically, autopsy. But, and this is important, the Grand Prairie Police Deputy Chief cautioned that there is a vast spectrum of poisons that could have been ingested at the time and eliminated from the body years later. So he's saying, no, we didn't find it, but that's because it's been 5 years. It's very possible that there was something that we can't find now. So her case is basically opened back up and considered a possible homicide at this point.
So it's not cleared, it's just inconclusive at that point.
Exactly. Now, interestingly, in 1994, a Fort Worth Star-Telegram article reported something that had not been widely publicized. An investigator stated that the autopsy on Lori Williams' exhumed body had actually found traces of strychnine.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So traces, but the results were not conclusive.
Interesting. So meaning not enough to act on, but that it was there?
Exactly. And unexplained. There's absolutely no reason that it should have been there. But the fact that it was, even in trace amounts, is very interesting to investigators looking at both of these women who are connected that died young, similar ways, right?
Yeah, that's a very suspicious coincidence.
Mm-hmm. It's very hard to live with, and it raises a question that nobody's ever been able to definitively answer. Was Lori Ann Williams the first victim? Is it possible that her death was a test, like a practice run, carried out by the same person who eventually killed Patsy? Or is it just a devastating coincidence inside an already devastating case?
I have some thoughts on that, but I don't know. That almost makes it feel like the people who are close to her with her business and they need the money.
He's always around, like Steve's around.
Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just kind of calculate. I don't know.
Interesting, huh?
I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah. Now, the second thread brings us to a second wax museum fire. So we already talked about the one associated with her second ex-husband, Cox. But on September 9th, 1988, less than a year after Patsy's murder, the Southwestern Historical Wax Museum, the $4 million at this point institution that Patsy had devoted her life to building, burned to the ground. Now, the details on this got a little blurry over the years as people have written about this case. Fire investigators initially ruled that the blaze started at an electrical box. Accidental. But that ruling was later changed from accidental to undetermined. Some fire investigators were privately convinced it was arson, noting that the fire spread with a speed that suggested an accelerant had been used. But no tests were done to confirm that, so the official ruling today is undetermined. Not arson, undetermined. Which means nobody has ever been charged with setting it, and technically the cause of that fire has never been officially established. What we do know is what it cost. The insurance company paid out $4 million, which sounds like a lot until you find out that replacing the museum would have cost approximately $5.5 million. So Sally and Steve were left $1.5 million short on rebuilding the wax museum. And here's an interesting detail. Of the approximately 300 wax figures inside that museum, they had figures of presidents, outlaws, historical icons. Only one survived. One. And that figure was a wax cowgirl who was standing in the front lobby. She was called Sally. After everything that had happened, Patsy's murder, the investigation, the financial battles, the one thing that survived that fire was a figure named after Sally. On September 24th, 1988, about 2 weeks after the fire, a Grand Prairie police sergeant named Steve Burton was at the ruins of the museum. He's over there looking for clues, looking for evidence, seeing if it somehow connects to Patsy's murder. While he's there, in the ruins of this museum, he spots a young man.
So he sees some guy there just combing through the debris of the burned down wax museum?
Exactly. And he's watching him. he sees this man grab a financial ledger that had somehow survived. Police had shown up. As soon as they do, this man throws the financial ledger and takes off running.
Who was he?
His name was Stanley Lester Pointer. He was 23 years old. And we're going to talk about him in some good detail because his story and the way it ends is even more extraordinary than the other threads in this case we've talked about.
Very interesting because there are some very significant threads in this case, I think.
Exactly.
And digging through the debris for a ledger, why would he want a financial ledger from a burned down museum?
Exactly the right question. It's one of the many questions about him that has never been fully answered. But investigators eventually caught up with him, and what they found in his possession was a story all by itself. Now, his story is not a footnote or a sidebar. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He was born in Texas. He was raised in Chico. And by all accounts, he was a drifter. He was described as a man who could not hold a job for more than a few months at a time.
What kind of jobs did he have?
He had been employed as a grocery clerk, a pharmacy technician, a janitor, a custodian, things that he could get without professional training for that specific job. And none of it lasted. His former employers said most of the people at the stores where he worked wouldn't even remember him. He was that transient. They called him forgettable, which is sad.
That is sad.
Lose a job and then pick up another one and then lose that one too.
So he's not exactly thriving here.
He is not. And the reason that I bring that up specifically and where it gets interesting is that Stanley was living in an upscale Irving apartment complex. He had a 2-bedroom unit that at the time rented between $430 and $630 a month in 1988. So today that'd be like $1,200 to $1,800. And this is for a man who has no stable income.
Oh, that doesn't really add up to his background.
No, it doesn't add up at all. And throughout his employment history, investigators discovered that Stanley had sometimes used a different name. And not just one different name. He had at least 3 different social security numbers used across his various jobs.
Oh, so he probably wanted to be forgettable because he was frauding people.
Probably, possibly. I mean, having 3 social security numbers, that's not something innocent people typically accumulate. And then in September of 1988, just 2 weeks before he was spotted going through the debris at the museum, Stanley enrolled at the Dallas Institute of Funeral Services in Irving. He paid $1,125 for his first term. So it's quite a bit today. That's like $3,500. He was planning to be a funeral director.
Interesting. So, man with a pharmacy background, multiple aliases, enrolls in funeral school.
Yep.
2 weeks before he's caught at a burned down crime scene.
Right. It's like
Very
a weird
odd
sentence that you probably never thought you would say, right?
Yeah. No, I did not think I would ever say that.
Yeah. So police are wondering about the different social security numbers. They're wondering how he affords where he lives. They're wondering how he affords to pay that upfront cost for the school he's going to. Like we mentioned, Steve Burton spots Stanley going through the debris. He sees this man take a financial ledger, and it's described as being in the museum's credenza. So Stanley grabs it. He looks up. He sees police are there watching. So he ran, tossed the ledger. He jumped in his car, locked the door, and sped away before anyone could stop him.
Why does someone run from a burned down building with a financial ledger unless he had a fake job there too under a fake alias?
Possibly.
My thought.
Very odd. And that question is what Bill Deere spent the next several years trying to answer. Police tried to locate Stanley after that and couldn't find him. They did recover the ledger from the bushes and return it to the museum, but Stanley had vanished. And guess for how long?
How long?
Almost a year. Police
Oh, wow.
looked for him for almost a year before they spotted him. They finally tracked him down in early September 1989. He was still enrolled at the Dallas Institute of Funeral Services. They walked into his class. They waited for him outside the room. When he came out, they arrested him on a burglary charge, and that was for taking that ledger.
Interesting. And what else did they find there?
You didn't start a business just to keep the lights on. You're here to sell more today than yesterday. You're here to win. Lucky for you, Shopify built the best converting checkout on the planet. Like the just one tapping, ridiculously fast acting, sky-high sales stacking, champion of checkouts. That's the good stuff right there. So if your business is in it to win it, win with Shopify. Start your free trial today at shopify.com/win.
Well, when Deere and the investigators went through Stanley's possessions, they found photographs, numerous photographs of Stanley himself taken at the Wax Museum before, but also after the fire, multiple visits to the museum, which were in his possession. And then investigators found something else that was hidden in a red laundry basket in Stanley's room.
What was that?
They were news clippings. He had a carefully maintained collection of newspaper articles about the chain of events at the Wax Museum. These clippings included ones talking about Patsy's murder, but also Lori's death, talking about the fire, the investigations, talking about the exhumation of Lori's body, all of it cut out, kept, and then hidden in his room.
Wow. So he was following them really kind of meticulously with everything he's kept all these years.
Almost like obsessively. And alongside the clippings, they found 2 airline tickets to various locations. And those have never been explained. Throughout his employment history, all of that, he has this lifestyle that costs way more than his income could support.
It's a very interesting person. Kind of a thread that I wasn't, expecting.
Yes.
It was quite the picture there of this man.
Yeah, I agree. It is a very specific picture. Bill Deere, who by this point had been working Patsy's case for over a year, characterized Stanley directly as a suspect in a series of mysterious incidents involving the museum. He suspected him of the fire, Patsy's murder, and also Lori's death. And I find that interesting because he would have only been like 17 at the time Lori died. Now, Bill told reporters, I think anyone who ducks under police lines at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, takes financial ledgers, and then runs when he sees police is someone you might be suspicious of.
Yeah, that tracks.
The arrest of Stanley was described by investigators as the biggest breakthrough so far in the Wax Museum fire case. Stanley was held on a $100,000 bond initially, which was later reduced to $500. Big drop there. When police checked his story and said they no longer needed him in jail at that time.
Interesting. What did he have to say?
Throughout all of it, Stanley maintained his innocence. He said the ledger was a souvenir, that it contained a depiction of Christ's Last Supper, which was his favorite exhibit at the museum. He denied any connection to the museum beyond being a casual visitor. He denied access to poisonous substances, saying those were kept under lock and key at the pharmacy where he'd worked. He denied the aliases, saying other people had simply misspelled his name.
And mistyped his social security number?
Probably that too.
What did he say about all the pictures and the news clippings and everything like that?
He didn't really have an explanation for those that satisfied anyone. And Sergeant Gustafson, which, now we know he's been working Patsy's murder for 2 years at this point, confirmed that he was very much interested in whatever Stanley's connection to everything that happened at the Wax Museum turned out to be. But he also said something that, I don't know, strikes me as pretty interesting.
What did he say?
He said about Stanley, as far as the link to Patsy's death and my investigation of the case, I have nothing concrete.
Yeah, that is interesting. Nothing concrete is different than another way you could have said that.
Agreed, because he didn't say nothing suspicious. He didn't say nothing interesting. He said nothing concrete, which really is the language of an investigator who's looking hard at someone and finding extra question marks and no answers. The burglary charge and the ledger theft was eventually reduced to criminal mischief, and a plea agreement was reached, and Stanley was released.
So he just walks away at this point, really.
Exactly. Bill Deere never closed the file on Stanley, though. He continued tracking him, keeping an eye on him. The museum case, Grand Prairie Police confirmed, was never closed either. And then in the spring of 1991, so about a year and a half after his arrest, Stanley surfaces again.
Where this time? The same area?
Nope, now he's in Austin. He had been wanted there on a felony warrant in connection with a December arson fire at a church youth center. The articles call it a felony warrant, which means there was enough evidence for a probable cause. Whether that fire was officially ruled arson, whether Stanley actually said it, we don't know.
Wow, another fire.
On April 13th, 1991, which was a Saturday, Stanley was in Dallas, specifically on Oak Lawn. There was a traffic officer working crowd control for this run that they were having, a local street event, and Stanley's car struck that officer.
They hit him on accident or on purpose?
Well, I don't know about that, but the officer landed on the hood of Stanley's car, and Stanley, rather than stopping, began swerving. And police described it as an apparent attempt to throw the officer off the windshield.
So like he's trying to shake him off the car?
Basically, exactly that.
Wow.
The officer fired several shots through the windshield, and Stanley died of gunshot wounds to the head, trunk, and extremities. And at this point, he was 25 years old. When Bill Deere heard the news, he said, I was hoping he wasn't going to die. I was hoping that he was going to live long enough to tell us what we wanted to hear.
Wow. Yeah, but whatever he knew, he took it with him.
Yep. Whatever his connection to the museum actually was, whatever he wanted with that ledger, whatever the photographs, airline tickets, newspaper clippings, all of it, it all died with him in April of 1991.
Yeah, we'll never know.
Not with certainty. What we know is that Grand Prairie Police said there was enough about Stanley to give you a lot of question marks, but not enough evidence to charge him with anything beyond stealing that ledger. And that connection between the fires, between the deaths, all of it unanswered. And Bill Deere does think that he's connected. Do you remember how we mentioned that somebody maybe could have been using somebody else to get closer to either Patsy or hire somebody to put it in her house, like told them how to get in? That was always a
like
thought.
the trap.
Exactly.
The trapper.
That was always the thought that investigators had. And it kind of seems like they wondered if Stanley was that person who'd been hired to do these things from someone else who wanted them done. Because there's no apparent connection otherwise.
Right. And maybe he really liked the museum and he was interested in crime and what happened to Patsy, and maybe he was doing his own armchair detective thing. Maybe there wasn't anything out there, but
right. If he
still
really
looks
truly
very suspicious, but I don't know.
if he really truly loved that museum, it is possible that, yeah, he just was following it because maybe he had met Patsy a handful of times and was sad that that happened to her.
Yeah.
I know my newspaper clippings are excessive. It keeps telling me
Right.
every time I hit a milestone. So
I know. I was like, maybe he had heard some things and was trying to piece things together because maybe he really did love the museum and wanted to figure out what happened. You know,
yep.
OG armchair true crime detective.
Like literally before you could get online and search every newspaper for the last few hundred years.
Yeah. But
No.
why not say those? And maybe he did say those things, but I don't know.
Well, right, because their answer to that was never in a way that satisfied detectives. So it's not
Right.
that he didn't give an answer. It's just they didn't really like the answer,
Believe him?
believe the answer. Yeah, something. Now, let's talk about what happens to the broader investigation after all of this. Patsy's murder investigation, our Sergeant Gustafson's case, continues separately from the museum fire case. In 1999, the case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries. That show has been going on for a very long time. And back then, it was one of the most watched programs in the country. And tips came in. None of it led to an arrest. After the fire, the Wax Museum was rebuilt and reopened in 1990 as the Palace of Wax and Ripley's Believe It or Not. It eventually drew 900,000 visitors a year. This museum that they rebuilt became one of the most successful tourist attractions in Grand Prairie.
Wow.
So the building was new, the business was running, the crime hadn't been solved, but newspapers said at the time it was, quote, melting into the background.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, the people who loved Patsy really kept carrying on.
Mm-hmm. Bill Deere kept following this case. It's like even after they don't have the funds to keep paying for a private investigator, he still wants answers. He's so invested. He said he wanted to write a book about it. I couldn't find one, so I don't know if he ever did that or not. But he just couldn't step away from it. And I think that tells you something about what this case does to people who really start to look at it and get close to it.
Yeah, it just doesn't let you go. There's so many questions.
Exactly. Somewhere within all of these suspects and motives, coincidences, things that don't actually make sense or line up correctly, is the truth about what happened to Patsy.
Yeah, and someone out there knows what that truth is.
Exactly. Bill Deere was hired by Patsy's family in June 1989, about a year and a half after her death. He came on after the initial wave of tips from that Unsolved Mysteries episode on Patsy. They got a lot of tips that had come and gone, all without breaking the case. Family wasn't ready to stop, so they hired someone who wasn't either. At some point during his investigation, after all the leads and dead ends, and the exhumation with Lori, also Stanley's arrest and everything that followed, Bill Deere did something that's kind of haunting. He wrote himself a letter. In it, he described his theory about who killed Patsy Wright, his hunch, the name he believed, how he thought it could be proved, and he sealed it. It was to be opened only after the case was solved. And as far as anyone publicly knows, that letter has never been opened. The Arlington Police Department Cold Case Unit still maintains this as an open investigation. The file has never been closed, and they hope that modern touch DNA analysis, which, as you might know if you've listened to us, it's capable of identifying a person from the skin cells left by simply handling an object, They hope that it could potentially find something on that NyQuil bottle that 1987 technology could not detect. If that evidence has been properly preserved, maybe we can close the gap, right?
Right. And maybe whoever did this that has been protected for 40 years by the limits of what forensics could do in 1987 might be caught, or
Right.
at least find out some answers.
Exactly. Now that those limits don't exist anymore. So if you're out there, if you knew Patsy, if you knew something about what happened in that house, technology has changed, the world's changed. It is never, ever too late.
Yeah. Everyone has been waiting a long time, long enough for her family and those who loved her.
Exactly. I mean, her daughter is 60 now.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you think? Who do you think did it? Any of the people we've talked about or someone completely different?
I don't really know. I really feel like a lot of it points towards her ex-husband. There's a lot of coincidences there.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, maybe they were working with somebody else. Maybe people were working together. There's a lot of interesting threads there.
And the fact that he would never talk to investigators, that just gets me.
And I don't know, all the things with Steve too are very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't picture that.
I can't
Only
either.
because of the CPR and getting that in his mouth and not freaking out about it.
Totally.
That to me feels off there if it had been him.
And you
I
would
don't know.
think like he would know how close Sally and Patsy were. Like killing off her only sibling when she's already lost her father. I don't know if her mom was still in the picture because he had a new wife, before he died. But I feel like that is extra cruel. Like knowing how close they were and taking her from Sally. That is the other part of him being one of the suspects that I don't know.
Yeah, that feels very awful to do to your wife.
Agreed.
But I honestly feel like if it had been him, that we would have seen more of a reaction from him after doing CPR.
Totally. I think that is such a good point because you would know. You would know that it wasn't just a bad reaction to cold medicine.
Right. And when you're doing CPR, maybe you don't know that happens sometimes. And if it did happen, like I said before, you would panic.
Agreed.
I don't know. The whole Bob thread is very interesting.
I feel like that trial coming up is more of a deadline than anything.
Yeah. He's got so many things kind of against her.
Exactly.
But then you think too, there's a lot of different things. They mentioned maybe a secret life with someone in Heiko, with one of the trainers.
True.
Maybe her current boyfriend found out about that and was very angry because he did love her. I don't know. What do you think?
There's something big in this case that's missing. Some connection, something that would pull it all together. There's so many coincidences and things that it's like, what is the common thread? Is it all connected or is it all coincidence?
Yeah. Or is it someone else, some housewife that had some grudge against her, maybe someone that is not even someone we talked about.
Right.
She was in that spotlight life.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe someone was very jealous of her. Maybe, there's so many maybes that could be out there.
Agreed.
I don't know.
A couple things that lead me to believe it had to be someone in her life is knowing that they would take NyQuil. Mm-hmm. I mean, like I've got a bottle in my medicine cabinet that's been there since last fall because we haven't been sick.
Right.
And so
she's also going to a lot of these parties. I'm sure they're going to brunches. Maybe they're talking about things. She could have mentioned that,
True.
Oh, I can't sleep. Sometimes I take NyQuil to help me go to sleep. Women talk about things a lot.
Very true, too. It could have been, oh, Patsy uses this to sleep. You should use that to fall asleep. Like something totally innocent that gives someone that idea.
It could have been a lunch at her house. They went in, said they had to go to the bathroom, and went into her bedroom.
Right.
There's so many what ifs.
And the biggest bummer about not being able to do that DNA till now is like Stanley died before there was any kind of database. Before,
Yeah.
I don't know if they had DNA on him because he hadn't been charged with a felony as far as I can find.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that wasn't even a rule for another like 15 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that they do find DNA and still can't match it to anybody, which is awful.
And a lot of these people who were her circle would be in their 80s.
Exactly. Or not around anymore.
Not around.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's so much. I think with the suspects that we talked about, I feel like Bob feels like the easiest explanation, the one with the most motive.
Agreed.
The suspiciousness that he won't talk to police. So many things there.
Yep.
And the trial that she was going to be a witness in, that seems very sketchy too. So
agreed.
I would feel inclined to point my thoughts towards him as being the number one suspect in my mind. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. After everything we've talked about, he does seem like he had the most to gain, maybe.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think about that line, killed with a vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's something. That is...
Agreed.
Oh, and having access to strychnine.
Yeah, the chemical business.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
This case, man, it is very scary that the most probable person is someone in her life. Like, I don't know if that's more scary than a stranger or if a stranger is more scary.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's very interesting. I wish that they could find who it was.
Me too. I am really hopeful that one day we'll see this one pop up as a solved cold case. That would be awesome.
For sure.
That is the case of Patsy Wright. If this case moved you, share it, talk about it, put Patsy's name in the world. The more people who know her story, the more chances there are that the right person hears it and decides that nearly 40 years is long enough. Thank you so much for listening to this 2-part episode. We hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the resources that we used to write this episode, check out our blog, which is on our website, crimeclueless.com, and we'll link it in the show notes. We would love to know what you think. Tell us, connect with us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. We are at Crime Clueless on all of them. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be super grateful if you would rate and or review our show. It means the world and it helps us more than you know. And as always, remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murders.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.